The blade at Eris Silas's throat hummed with a low, violet frequency that made the fine hairs on her neck stand. Behind her, the human, Vance, shifted just an inch, his hand hovering over the Nexus key. One signal would ignite the fleet or seal their collective grave. Overlord Malachar leaned forward, his many-eyed gaze narrowing at the trembling royal. What happens when an empire's last hope is a species that doesn't believe in a fair fight? To see how this gamble plays out across the stars, subscribe now to our chronicles. Now, let us see the shadow that led them to this ledge. 12 hours earlier, the recycled air in the Ethelgardian throne room had tasted faintly of scorched copper. Archon Kalen stood by the tall, crystalline windows, his fingers tracing the hem of the simple white robes he had donned in mourning for his burning outer colonies. The Archon's gaze was fixed on the docking bay where a ship that looked more like a collection of welded scrap than a sovereign vessel drifted into the berth. Kalen didn't look at the high-priced mercenaries his advisors had begged him to hire. He looked at the 3 humans descending the ramp, their movements efficient, devoid of the ceremonial grace his people prized. Vance led them. He wasn't wearing gold-plated armor or energy shields. He wore charcoal-gray fatigues and carried a crate that hummed with a jagged, irregular rhythm. "You bypassed the Crolian guard," Kalen observed, his voice raspy. "They are the finest soldiers in the quadrant." "The Crolians fight for honor, Archon," Vance replied, his voice flat, eyes already scanning the room for structural weaknesses. "Honor won't stop the swarm. We're here because you want to win, and we're the only ones willing to be monsters to make that happen." The Archon nodded slowly, though his daughter, Silas, stood stiffly beside him, her jaw tight as she watched the humans begin to unpack. To stop a galaxy-consuming swarm, an empire bypassed the universe's greatest mercenaries to hire its apex predators. Humans. It was a terrifying realization for a culture built on thousands of years of rigid, ethical warfare. Within the hour, the humans had established a perimeter. They didn't take over the barracks, they took over the sensor grid. Vance stood at the primary console, his fingers moving with a terrifying fluidity across the Ethelgardian interface. He didn't ask for permission. He simply locked out the local technicians and rerouted power to the outer defensive patrol lines. "The Vraxian scouts are dropping out of warp," Specialist Thorne reported from a secondary terminal. "Execute the retreat," Vance ordered. Silas stepped forward, her hands clenched. "Retreat? Our doctrine dictates a forward wall. If we pull back, we leave the civilian transport hubs exposed." "We're not retreating," Vance said without looking up. "We're baiting." The holographic display showed the Ethelgardian ships turning tail in a maneuver that looked panicked and clumsy, a deliberate insult to their naval history. The Vraxian scouts, sensing blood, surged forward with predatory speed. Kneeling before the towering alien overlord as her surrender was broadcast to thousands of enemy warships, Eris Silas watched her disguised human bodyguard reach for the device that would either save her empire or guarantee its immediate execution. If you need to know the fate of the Dominion, subscribe and stay close for the conclusion. Vance waited until the scouts were deep within the debris field of the outer rim. With a single keystroke, the space between the asteroids ignited. He had spent the first 40 minutes of his arrival seeding the area with invisible mines that didn't register on standard scanners. The scouts didn't just explode. They were vaporized in a synchronized grid of fire. "They'll be angry now," Thorne muttered, her eyes reflected in the blue light of the tactical map. "Good," Vance said. "Anger makes them predictable. Prepare the fleet for a blind jump. We're going to give them exactly what they expect next." Silas watched the man. He wasn't a hero from the epic poems. He was a mechanic of death, calculating lives like fuel consumption. She looked down at her simple white robes, the fabric soft and unassuming, realizing that she was no longer just a spectator in this war. She was becoming a component in Vance's machine. The Vraxian dreadspire was a cathedral of jagged obsidian and suffocating heat. Archon Kalen watched the grainy feed from a hidden transmission, his heart hammering against his ribs as he saw his daughter, Silas, standing in the center of the enemy bridge. She looked fragile, a speck of white silk against the towering, insectoid shadows of the Vraxian High Command. Vance stood 2 paces behind her, his face reconstructed by biometric nanites to mimic the gray, stony features of an Ethelgardian protector. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He was a statue of coiled kinetic energy. The violet blade didn't waver from Silas's throat. Overlord Malakur's voice was a wet grinding of plates. You speak of surrender, little heir, but your species smells of desperation, not defeat. Silas didn't flinch. She had seen Vance dismantle a scout's engine with a primitive wrench. She knew the utility of cold, hard steel. We offer our core worlds, she said, her voice echoing through the broadcast that now reached every ship in the swarm. In exchange, we ask only for the preservation of the royal lineage. It was a lie that tasted like ash, but she delivered it with the practiced grace of 1,000 years of diplomacy. Underneath the simple white robes, the pulse sensor Vance had strapped to her thigh thrummed once, twice. Thorn was in position to see the final moves of this cosmic gambit. Subscribe and witness the birth of a new era. The signal went out. It wasn't a roar. It was a whisper of data. Deep in the guts of the Vraxian supply ships, forged command codes, meticulously crafted by Thorn during the chaos of the minefield, overrode the automated turrets. The swarm's own fleet turned on itself. Massive freighter vessels, laden with highly volatile biofuel, were suddenly targeted by their own escort destroyers. High-energy beams sliced through pressurized hulls, turning the rear of the Vraxian armada into a chain of miniature suns. The bridge of the dreadspire erupted in a cacophony of screeching alarms. Malakur roared, his attention snapping toward the tactical displays showing his fleet consuming itself. Now, Vance whispered. The transition was a blur of silver. The violet blade was still humming when Vance's hand clamped around the Overlord's wrist. There was a sickening crack, not of a machine but of chitinous bone. Vance didn't use a rifle. He pulled a serrated blade from his sleeve, a weapon designed for the messy, close-quarters brutality humans had perfected in their own dark ages. He moved through the bridge guards like a shadow through a forest. He didn't aim for armor, he aimed for the gaps, the joints, the soft sensory clusters. While the Ethelgardians fought with honor, Vance fought with geometry. And now, in the heart of the enemy's terror, the blade hummed no more. The Overlord slumped to the deck, his life fluid staining the polished obsidian. Vance stood over the corpse, his charcoal fatigue splattered, his eyes already tracking the next threat. The broadcast hadn't cut out. The entire swarm had just watched their god die at the hands of a ghost. Ethelgardian warships, their hulls painted in the matte black of the Soul Vanguard, dropped out of stealth. They didn't offer terms. They targeted the engines of the disorganized Vraxian vessels, pinning them against the backdrop of the burning supply fleet. The war wasn't over, but the swarm was broken. Hours later, the hangar deck of the Ethelgardian flagship was quiet. Kalen watched his daughter walk toward him. Her simple white robes were scorched at the hem and stained with the dark indigo of Vraxian blood. She looked at the fabric, then at the human ship preparing for departure. She didn't discard the robes. She folded the bloodied silk over her arm, a reminder of the price of survival. 6 months, Vance said, leaning against the ramp of his salvage ship. The Apex Accord won't like that. We killed their vanguard. They'll come with everything. Then we will be ready, Silas said. She didn't sound like an heiress anymore. She sounded like a soldier. Your pragmatism has a steep cost, Commander. But I find I prefer the weight of a weapon to the weight of a crown. Vance offered a sharp, mirthless nod, then vanished into the shadows of his ship. As the human vessel burned into the stars, Silas looked down at the white robes in her hand, knowing they would never be clean again.